Welcome to the SDA Housing Podcast, brought to you by NDIS Property Australia. Before starting this episode, we need to provide a general disclaimer. Information contained in this podcast is general in nature only. It does not take into account the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. You need to consider your financial situation and needs before making any decisions based on the information in this podcast. And you should consider seeking independent and professional advice for your personal circumstances. All right, let's begin.
Hello everybody, my name is Minh and I'm your co-host with Debbie from NDIS Property Australia, and you listen to the SDA Housing Podcast. The show explains, highlights, guides and brings awareness about all things SDA in this ever-changing NDIS world. Debbie, welcome.
Hello, Minh.
What is today's topic about, Debbie?
We're talking about a harrowing picture of fraud and funding misappropriation. As per a recent ABC article was released beginning of April, and there's been subsequent articles and information coming out in the media of a NDIS provider who, in reading this article, it has absolutely devastated me that this happens. We know it happens, but reading the details. So yeah, we thought that we should just talk about the bad side of the NDIS providers that the NDIS is trying to cut down and sort out.
Now, we're going to go in great detail here because this is public information. It's on ABC News, it's on YouTube, it's on LinkedIn, it's on various public news platforms. Companies named, the perpetrators named. We want to cover it because this came out officially in December. I think the raids happened in December, Debbie, where Australian Federal Police and the NDIA upon this Melbourne provider. So, Debbie, I'll let you cover the summary of all the facts and we'll discuss it throughout the whole
Yeah.
week here.
Look, this is a huge summary, so I'll try and keep it brief. But essentially, large sums of taxpayer money meant for some of the most vulnerable Australians have been flowing through companies linked to a man named Khwaja Moeen Haroon. While his network has been under investigation for suspected fraud by the NDIS, some of those in his care have been left living in squalor. Haroon and companies linked to him were operating a network of homes that housed NDIS participants, primarily focused in Melbourne's outer western suburbs. Quick summary, the federal authorities suspect he has defrauded more than $10 million from the NDIS by coercing individuals with disabilities into substandard housing and misappropriating their funds. Activities have left some NDIS participants living in deplorable conditions, highlighting the severe consequences of this kind of exploitation. The article goes into a few actual case studies, which I will read through. The perpetrator, Khwaja Moeen Haroon, has of course denied all allegations, but it has raised potential gaps in the NDIS system that has allowed for this to happen in the first place. There's reports from support coordinators who encountered alarming situations during welfare checks. And this has also highlighted the challenges faced by frontline workers in identifying and reporting exploitation and implications of NDIS fraud. Do you want me to go first into these cases?
In a minute.
Okay.
You know, there's a lot of this said article case across the platforms, as I said earlier, and my impression is, yes, you're innocent until proven guilty in the court of law, common law in Australia. I know that, yeah. But in the article, one of the articles I read a few years ago, he was a taxi driver. This guy was a taxi driver a few years ago. And then all of a sudden, he's an NDIS provider, and all of a sudden, he's buying all these mansions and houses and cars, and he's a very, very wealthy individual. Now, the NDIA and the Australian Federal Police would not be silly. They know who's doing the wrong thing here, and that's why it's such a public. Debbie, this would be a major, one of the biggest fraud cases uncovered, I think, Debbie.
Oh, absolutely. I haven't heard anything that's of this level when we're talking, more than $10 million from one person.
And funnily enough, Debbie, I was on a phone call this morning, only an hour ago, with a builder we're working with very closely in Melbourne. And he said to me, his exact words were, "Minh, did you hear about the fraud news on the news lately?" I said, "Yeah, I heard about it, about a $10 million fraud, NDIS and former taxi drivers." Yeah. I said, why tell me this story? He said to me, he bumped into those boys about a few months ago, last year. I said, well, what happened? They rocked up in their supercars, 2 Lambos.
Lamborghinis.
Yeah,
oh, my God.
And trying to wheel and deal and buy this SDA development site that this guy is building. And he said, no, this is build and fill up and then hold and blah, blah, blah. And he said to them, do you know what you're talking about here? Like, you're talking about as if you're a developer and you're trying to buy assets and like this. And he was not impressed with the way they conducted themselves, where they spoke. Because they're effectively just real estate guys, providers trying to milk the system. And exactly, this article is all about milking the system. They've drained the accounts of these participants. And I think I'll give my impression more towards the end, but Debbie, I'd like you to continue on with your little summary here.
Yeah, okay. Before I go into the cases, I'm just looking on another list of details about this guy to just paint a clearer picture. So he became the part owner of a disability business called Crescent Community Care when he was driving taxis in 2018. By 2021, his business card stated he was the company's operations manager. He was already then on the radar of organisations helping people at risk of homelessness, including the Mental Health Legal Centre. It came to the notice of authorities that he was persuading NDIA's participants to move from supported residential services, which are state-regulated boarding houses, into his private share houses. At the time, Haroon rebuffed the criticism, saying that participants had moved voluntarily and he was the saviour when it comes to seeking someone who can stand up and take them out of the vicious cycle of abuse. Despite the concerns that the authorities have already known about him for a few years now, he's only expanded his business network, signing up dozens of participants and turning over millions of dollars. He's the director of 24 companies, several of them operating in the NDIA space. Last year, he splashed out $3.25 million on a 4-bedroom mansion in Melbourne's north. It came complete with an indoor pool, polished parquetry floors, a home cinema and a jacuzzi. A bank statement seen by the ABC shows that over 93 days in 2022, a Westpac account held in one of Haroon's NDIA's company's names received more than $254,000 in NDIA's money and rent. Over the same period, the vast bulk of that money, $241,000, was transferred directly to a bank account in Haroon's name. ABC has found more than 12 homes Haroon and his network used to house NDIA's participants, many of them in places like Melton, Wyndham Vale, Hoppers Crossing, in the western suburbs of Melbourne, far from public transport and amenities. Participants were lured there with cash, cigarettes, food and a warm bed, according to 2 of the former workers and 6 services that have had clients move into the homes. Adding to their isolation, many didn't have phones or were without phone credit. Some of the homes were fitted with internal and external cameras, which 2 former workers allege were used to monitor the participants. They say that if alternative services came to help, participants were sometimes moved to a new house, so their NDIS packages remained under the control of Haroon's companies. Sometimes left alone with little care other than being provided meals, the drug addictions of participants would get worse, the insiders say. At one home in Truganina, neighbours say they've seen drug-affected participants in the street and that police were regular visitors. So I think that paints a pretty clear case of what was going on there. I do have a few case studies, but Min, do you want to add anything at that point?
I do. You mentioned the word security cameras. We're not allowed to have security cameras in the house monitoring participants. That's a breach of privacy. So I just want to go back to some technical work, we talk about fraudulent activities. I just want to read out some examples of it. Examples of fraud is making false claims for supports that were not provided. That's number 1. Charging for more than what was just provided. Number 2. Claiming the same invoice more than once. Number 3. Luring NDIS participants away from the existing providers with promise of cash and other benefits. Number 4, as Debbie mentioned. And 5, another example is using false medical reports to claim NDIS funding for people who did not have a disability. Okay? Debbie, you and I have heard all these kind of stories in the last 5 years now. We also know how limited the resources are of the fraud task force inside the NDIA to do this, because in one of the articles here, Debbie, that you may mention in a minute, the welfare check discussion in this exact case, they went out, support coordinators, I think 1 or 2 of them went out, and as soon as they went to site to check on the participants, all these support workers turned up who were already there, and more turned up. I don't know if they were support workers or they were thugs, But with them standing there in front of the participants was actually scared to say, I am scared, I don't want to be here, and get me out of here. They didn't say those words, but their face and their
demeanor
was definitely evident, because later on when they did find and save the participants, they said, I didn't want to be there, I was being pressured, and I was scared for my life, and blah, blah, blah. So obviously thugs / support workers, was trying to keep what do you call this? This operation, this ring operation, this coercion, this, what's the word when you control someone's life? What's the word for it, Debbie?
Coercion, control.
And they came back, the whole house was empty, and they moved to another house.
Yeah.
So the providers, by staying on the radar, would move on to another house to hide the participants. So there's my feedback on that, on this crackdown on fraud. And Debbie, continue on with the article.
Yeah, well, I'm actually going to go into 3 case studies now. One of the one that Minh just referred to. The names have been changed, obviously, but this is a case of Greg. So a support coordinator went to visit Greg in a house in Wyndham Vale, an NDIS participant with significant mental health issues. She walked into the house and was struck by a lack of furniture. 1 dining table, 2 chairs. The TV was turned on, but it said it had no signal. She was speaking to Greg in the living room when another man came out of his room appearing agitated and begging to use her phone. He said he didn't want to live in the house anymore, alleging he was being mistreated and that he had no way of making calls, she says. Support workers in the home refused to provide the name of the company they were working for. The support coordinator left the house and called the police. It was determined after that the staff in the house were employed by Haroon, who operated a network of homes housing NDIS participants in Melbourne's outer west suburbs. The next day, the police were asked to do a welfare check on Greg at the house, but when they arrived, they found the house abandoned. When Greg was eventually found and visited by the support coordinator, other staff were present and Greg appeared guarded in his answers about wanting to stay in the house. Later, when Greg eventually left the house, he told the support coordinator he had been petrified as he was told he wasn't allowed to leave the property unless with a staff member and that he felt like he was in prison. Case of Michael. Michael has an acquired brain injury, was living in a Melbourne public housing flat when he suddenly disappeared, causing concern among his carers. He had been persuaded to move to a house in Melbourne's outer western suburbs linked to Khwaja Moeen Haroon. Due to his disability, Michael was unaware of his new location. His original support workers attempted to locate him, but staff at the new residence allegedly withheld information about his whereabouts. During this 4-day period, before his carers found him and returned him home, Michael was hospitalised twice for epileptic seizures, reportedly because his medication had been left behind during the abrupt move. This ordeal left him distressed and distrustful. It's also discovered that one of the businesses linked to Haroon had contacted the NDIA to try to take over Michael's planned coordination, thus his funding, during that 4-day period. And the last one, the case of Jim. Jim, a 59-year-old man, moved into an apartment rented by a disability company associated with Khwaja Moeen Haroon. He's now facing eviction and potential homelessness. Jim claims to have paid thousands of dollars from his NDIS funding for services he did not receive. This situation underscores the alleged misappropriation of funds and the severe impact on vulnerable individuals relying on the NDIS for support.
As you were talking about these cases, Debbie, I just thought back about how easy it was to, I'll use the crude word, rip off the NDIS. PACE. PACE has been how long in system now, Debbie? The rollout of PACE?
Nearly a year.
Yeah. So prior to PACE, whenever providers submitted their invoice into the NDIS system, the product portal, it would be paid immediately. No questions asked.
No checks, no balances.
Yeah, just paid. And obviously this guy's been a NDIS provider for 6 years now, Debbie?
Yeah.
So prior to a year ago, every invoice was putting through was being paid immediately within 7 days. And it was a cash cow. It was a license to print money. It was cash cow. It was just pulling out money out of the system and just using it through his own benefits. And unfortunately, this is a podcast. You can't actually see the videos here, but if you go onto YouTube or Google and Google the word, the name.
Even the ABC website.
Yeah. You can see this actual video article, and see the deplorable squalor in which they're living in. We're talking about not SDA housing here. We're talking about normal houses, normal townhouses. It looks like third world.
Oh, it's just horrific.
Ghetto third world in West Melbourne. And when you have thugs / support workers, yes, I know, innocent until proven guilty, coercing, kidnapping, moving, convincing, bribing, whatever you want to call it, to enforce that this this organization controls the physical well-being or lack of well-being to drain their NDIS accounts for services not provided and rendered, then of course you go from zero to hero, taxi driver to multimillionaire in 6 years because the system's so easy to rip off. Debbie, your comments?
Yeah, look, I just find this really disturbing, and there's a lot of noise out there about the clamp down from the NDIS and how much of a problem it's causing for providers and participants. But you've got to understand this is actually why they're doing it, because there was such gaps in the system, and it's never going to be perfect, but something has to be done to stop this situation.
Back to your case number 1, where that lady went out to welfare check again. Do you remember reading the time difference between first incident and second incident?
No, I don't know that it was actually.
It was mentioned.
Was it?
8 months.
8 months. I don't remember reading. God.
So to go out there for the first time, no, there was 3. The first incident check, then they were alarmed with it. Back recently again, I think a week or 2 weeks later, and then they disappeared to another house, and then they found it again 8 months later. So that was the time frame there.
Yeah, look, it's just really disturbing. And just something else in the article that I'm very concerned about, and this is as it was published a week or so ago. 2 of the companies associated with Haroon, Crescent Care Community and Indisability, are still registered as NDIS providers.
Hashtag NDIA. Why do you still have Crescent
Community Care?
Why are they still registered as a
NDIS provider
on your website? Please, damn it, take it off.
Yeah, they say that they have been investigating him since 2021. Full-scale investigation by the NDIS's Fraud Fusion Task Force has been up and running since mid-23. That's nearly 2 years now. So as you said, the fraud investigation is definitely under-resourced, but yeah, it's still happening, basically, people. There's still companies out there that should not be operating.
Now, Debbie, just a tangent here, going off tangent. This is a NDIS registered provider.
Yeah.
What about the 200,000
unregistered
provider?
Yeah, exactly. Well, they will.
They don't follow the same rules.
No, they don't. They don't have any rules.
Code of ethics.
No, they don't need to undergo any kind of audits or provide any documentation about what they're doing.
And this is why a year and a half ago, Debbie, when Bill Shorten said at the end of 2023, the massive changes for the next 5 years.
That providers must all be registered.
So over the next 5 years, this is back in 23, obviously. So the next 5 years, we'll see big, massive changes. IL, registration, unregistered providers and support coordinators should be registered as providers. Registered, yes. This is to help have a clean sweep of the fraud and the incorrect defrauding.
However, I can see a hole there because these were registered companies. And I know that the vast majority of those 200,000 unregistered providers are probably doing the right thing. And they're going to now suffer or maybe go out of business because they don't have the resources to become a registered provider. Look, I guess this just highlights, the difficulties faced by the NDIA in trying to run this massive organisation and trying to run it fairly and safely for everybody. It's got so much good, but this is just the biggest fraud case that we've come across.
Look, my personal opinion on this very topic is people who work in businesses or business owners in the NDIS sector should not be making millions of dollars of profit personally for personal gain. Debbie, I know business should make a profit, but to make $1 squillion personally, that's a little bit unfair. And I will give you examples to our listeners here. My wife works for a very large NDIS provider in Queensland here. And she told me one story once where they went out to meet up with some SIL provider partners and talk about collaboration work. And in their visit to their office, car park was all these very fancy BMWs, Porsches, Mercedes. Like, come on. And they knew straight away that they should not be doing business with this organization, because if you're making that much money, I'm not saying milking or draining, but if you're making that much money in the NDIS, it's a little bit unfair when
It's suspicious.
when everyone is struggling to survive.
Yeah.
5-10% profit margin is what the average is in the NDIS as providers. And if you're making squeens of dollars doing this care work, something's not right there.
Yeah.
That's all. So be very mindful of very successful providers because, number one, they are one of the very few elite, rare, successful businesses, or two, they could be doing something wrong. Now, I'm not laying blame to anyone, but just be mindful that fraud and incorrect business ethics do come to play when you're making too much money in the NDIS. That's all. Yeah.
Yep.
Any final words, Debbie? I mean, of this topic of fraud crackdown and whatnot?
No, not really. I think that sort of covered everything we wanted to say. Just, yeah, it's not a perfect world in the NDIS, but I believe that despite the difficulties in clamping down on the fraud and trying to make it a more efficient system, there will be problems, and we've seen that already.
I mean, in our world, Debbie, the SDA world sector within the NDIS, as small as it is, we've seen a lot of organisations move on from SDA. And we're talking about SDA providers, we're talking about property spruikers. I mean, I've been in this sector with Debbie for the last 4 years or so. I've seen stuff and in my SDA world, our world, sorry. And I see certain providers who are developers / SDA providers, builders / SDA providers, SDA providers / spruikers. Where there's a buck to be made, a dollar to be made, the greedy individuals or organizations will be there. And I've heard stories about certain SDA providers, two of them big ones in Queensland here, Southeast Queensland. One is ex-property guy, now is a big, massive SDA provider around Australia, wanting to list on the ASX stock market one day, doing so many guaranteed returns on SDA homes where they offer 200-300 grand returns on houses because they get they give the investors a share of the SIL provision care work. That's just conflict of interest. No, that may not be fraud, but it's definitely conflict of interest there. When we're juggling 2-3 things at once, being property guy, SIL provider, and SDA provider, for sure. Another organisation who recently, 2 months ago, had a raid on them by the Quality Assurance Commission from the NDIS, a raid on them and dragged the directors back from overseas, who I think are hiding overseas, back to their office in Brisbane to have an official face-to-face investigation, right? And all the staff who are managing the SDA properties there have all left because they were handling 300-ish properties, and they were being yelled at, screamed at, threatened by investors. And, and these guys are developers, town planner / lawyer / current or ex, who are running a SDA business and just totally milking the property world, where they were making probably $150,000, $200,000, $250,000 margin per property build, where they're forcing builders to pay a fee to use their plumber, use their electrician, which is totally against build businesses anyway, and they're totally ripping off investors by 100, 200, 300 grand overpriced while being an SDA provider, right? And recently I saw that they're trying to do a merger with a Sydney organisation, then they changed the name back to the old organisation. Complete mess. And when you're getting stories being told to you from investors who are having bad experiences with this SDA provider, which we always know are conflicted as well, when you're conflicted by money, then obviously you're in the wrong line of work, then it's really bad, right? Especially when one of them is an admin on several Facebook pages as well, with all these providers talking there. So I see him talking, and he, lo and behold, is one of those guys inside this company that's gonna be in trouble one day is now with NDIS. So it may not be fraud, Debbie, but definitely when you're
not ethical. That's
ethical,
sure.
conflicted, but you're almost fraudulent, And back to the Lambo guys, the guys in those cars walked up in Scoresby to this builder. A third party said that it's Commonwealth fraud. It's one thing to be called out by normal legal, fraud cases, but this is Commonwealth fraud. When you're defrauding the Commonwealth government, you're going to jail big time and for a long time as well. So if you're out there and you're listening, please be careful what you do. Because if you turn the line of illegal or unethical practices, then you could be in trouble there. That's all. They're my last words, Debbie. Anything else from you?
No, nothing from me. Thanks, Min.
Please make sure, Debbie, we'll add the YouTube video link, one or two of them, plus an article, this article as well, so people can look at the video and see firsthand the videos of what
Yeah,
what you see.
do take the time to watch it. It's quite disturbing, but it's eye-opening.
Cool. Thank you very much, Debbie. Bye-bye.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please make sure you are subscribed and following us so you can keep in the loop with all of our upcoming episodes. We would really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star rating, a written review, and to share this podcast with those that could benefit. Until next time, catch you on the next episode.